because that's how I understood its history. I guess if you had to summarize the way I understood the world up until my mid-20s, you could characterize it as PEP. That stands for Progressive Except for Palestine. For some people, they're right-wing on all issues, and others left. For me, it was anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, so on, all those issues lining up the same, but around Israel, taking a more hawkish stance, because that's how I understood its history. That it was happening in my name. I knew Arab people, Muslim people. I never met any Palestinian people really, to intimately. And so when I met Palestinian people, they're just through my daily life, and just got to know what their lives were like. I came to realize that the Palestinian population was being collectively punished. That what was being explained as a security measure clearly was not based on security needs. Clearly it was done in order to keep an entire population as a easily available pool of exploitable labor. And once that clicked for me, and I realized that by just talking to people and understanding what they go through on a daily basis, it enraged me. First of all, that this was happening at all, that it was happening in my name, and that I had been lied to my whole life. So that was like the first real switch for me, and that happened within a month or a month and a half of landing in the country. We look to the youth as being better versions of ourselves. Most Jewish Israeli youth, over 50%, do not want to study in a classroom with non-Jews. Most do not want to live in the same building or on the same street as non-Jews. That's horrid in and of itself. But statistically, it's getting worse, because every few years the survey is conducted, and if you go back, you find that it keeps incrementally getting worse and worse and worse. We look to the youth as being better versions of ourselves, but sadly in Israel it's going in the opposite direction, and the younger generation is getting more and more and more racist. You're cowered into silence because you can't prove from your own personal experience that that's not the case. If back in the day an average Israeli at least would know one or two Palestinians, nowadays you can grow up your entire life and not know intimately any person of a different religion. And so it leads to this situation where, without having a body experience, you can't, even if in your heart your gut tells you that people are the same, no matter what their race or religion or whatever, you don't have an experience that you can bolster that argument with. So when all around you were surrounded by media images and racist politicians telling you that Arabs are evil and Muslims are evil, et cetera, you're cowered into silence because you can't prove from your own personal experience that that's not the case. And teachers are actually afraid to discuss it with their students, because the minute they open up the topic, this segregation of society has become more and more effective, and that's created, that's breeded a generation of haters, to the point now where teachers in Israel are afraid to talk about race in the classroom. I mean, it is part of the curriculum. There are segments where they're supposed to unpack issues of civil rights and human rights. But those are bad words in Israel. They have become swear words. And teachers are actually afraid to discuss it with their students, because the minute they open up the topic, you have students come screaming, screw the Arabs, damn the Arabs, F the Arabs, kill the Arabs. And this is like a legitimated discourse. You're talking about eugenics. When mainstream Israeli politicians speak of defending the demographics, of ensuring that generation after generation of the population will continue to be at least 75 or 80 or whatever percent Jewish, you're talking about eugenics. You're talking about determining the racial composition of the country. These ideas have long since passed from the world, and they should remain in the dustbin of history. Feel an allegiance with the idea of what Israel is supposed to be. These parties want to portray themselves as supporters of the Israeli government because there are Canadian citizens, both Jewish and non-Jewish Zionists, who feel an allegiance with the idea of what Israel is supposed to be. And it's been branded, the country's been branded to be, to have the image or to represent the image of all the things that you aspire for, like this legend of the underdog nation, the persecuted people rising from the ashes of near extinction and then, claiming their place among the nations. It's the farthest thing from actuality where I live. To me, it's just rights. In every location in the land, does everyone have the same amount of rights? Does everyone have the same amount of privileges? That's the ABC of a democracy. It's the basis of an egalitarian society. And it's the farthest thing from actuality where I live. And whether the country is cantonized or whether it's a unified state, the point is, what is the regime that operates there? Currently, Jewish people have extra privileges and non-Jewish people have various levels of fewer amounts of rights and privileges. What we need to get to is a regime in which everyone is equal. One day equality will come, and then the history books will be written, and then we will see who said what, whose side were you on? Did you stand for equality or did you stand against it? Did you stand for colonialism or did you stand for liberation? I mean, loyalty to the state of Israel has become a brand that is so powerful that it's almost like kryptonite if you don't.